Is she bigger than Sabalenka? Is she bigger than Coco? Is she the big?
Yes, it's insane. Bigger than Sabalenka and Coco, dude. She is experiencing the same phenomenon that Fonseca did with absolute rock star. Steve Johnson, a 12-year ADP veteran who has witnessed every type of star the sport can produce, said those things. He wasn't referring to a Grand Slam winner. He was referring to a 20-year-old Filipino who was rated 140th in the world 18 months prior. Alex Eala is her name. And the events that transpired in the weeks preceding Indian Wells 2026 compelled a whole sport to re-evaluate who is truly in charge. Does the golf gap still need to be closed before the coronation is complete, or can AILA turn that belief into a deep Indian Wells run? Rewind to March 2025 and share your guess in the comments. Eala is a wild card going into Miami. The majority of casual fans had never heard of her because she had no seeding, no expectations, and a poor ranking. Madison Keys was defeated by her. Then she defeated the most powerful player in women's tennis, Iga Swiatek. She advanced to the WTA 1000 semifinals, making history as the first Filipino to do so. She reached the 50th spot in the world before the end of the year. In Guadalajara, she won her first WTA 125 championship. She became a Nike global ambassador and strolled through the Oregon headquarters, where her likeness was featured on the walls. Portraits honoring her people, heritage, and her flag. Then February 2026 arrived in Dubai. She defeated Jasmine Paolini, who was ranked 8th in straight sets, 6-1 in the first round, forcing a tiebreak to end the match. Paolini was reduced to chasing shadows. On February 23, Indian Wells announced its draw after the rankings upgraded Alex Eala to world number 31. The highest position ever attained by a Filipino woman in the 47-year history of the WTA. 31 Eala seeds by for the first round a predicted rout that might put her up against Coco Gauff as early as the third round. Her name had to be circled by the experts who had previously scrolled past it. The response came right away. Videos analyzing her ascension proliferated on YouTube. Podcasts hurried to explain how a player they had hardly discussed was surpassing the world leader in stadium attendance a year ago. A previous top 20 player on the Nothing Major podcast. The statement that ignited the tennis media was made by Steve Johnson. He affirmed what the masses had already demonstrated. Even seasoned champions were unable to match Ayala's ability to fill seats. This was no longer about potential. This concerned a competitive and commercial force that the establishment had not anticipated. The same analysts who had written off her Miami race as an anomaly were now observing her train with Sabalenka at Indian Wells, two players that share the same court but are at opposing ends of the credibility timeline. In Miami in 2025, the evidence began to mount. Two players in the top 10 were eliminated in the same week by a wild card ranked 140th. It would have been a narrative on its own. However, the audience reported a different story. Supporters in the grandstand claimed to have never witnessed anything like it. Sections that had been somewhat unoccupied for previous games were filled with Filipino flags. Employees at the tournament verified the atmosphere was more akin to a concert than a tennis match. Look at the 140th ranked Monday of that Miami week. A player in the top 100 with a semi-final result by Sunday. The trajectory was a pattern that developed in real time, not an accident. The remainder of 2025 saw an acceleration of that trend. Guadalajara won her first title. Every tournament brought more flags, more prayers, and more proof that something extraordinary was developing as the ranking rose past 6th, 70, 60, and 50. Dubai 2026 attested to it. Eala stood on the court after defeating Paolini and asked the audience, "How many of you have prayed for me?" For 115 million Filipinos watching worldwide, the subsequent roar was a response. She is currently the world's biggest attraction in women's tennis. Yes, Steve Johnson, discussing the Nothing days later, a major podcast added numbers to what the crowd had previously shown. She is the biggest draw in women's tennis, according to him, not a player to watch, not a future star. Present tense is the main attraction. In his own words, absolute rock star. However, she resembles an absolute rock star. The establishment is forced to pay attention when a 12-year tour veteran who has shared locker rooms with the biggest names in sports makes that assertion without being asked. There is a recurring pattern in Miami, Dubai, and now Indian Wells. The results come after the people assemble in numbers that startle the organizers. The experts then rush to explain what the fans had noticed months before. Here, Johnson's qualifications are important. Over the course of their career, this player won numerous ADP titles. That lasted almost 10 years. At the highest level, he has witnessed the rise and fall of stars. He has observed the distinction between content and hype. He did not hedge his assessment. He did not mention that Eala might end up being the main attraction, that he said that she was already larger than Goff and Sabalenka, attracting the kind of standing room-only audiences that the sport saves for its most exceptional performers. The same week, that endorsement was received. Eala was seated with Indian Wells. The moment changed his remarks from commentary to prophecy. Nike's choice to highlight Eala in their global headquarters is a sign of something bigger than the career path of a single athlete. The commercial focus of the sport is changing. The Grand Slam victories and fan bases were prerequisites for tennis greatness for many years. However, Eala is changing that equation. Prior to the big awards, the fan army arrived. The ranking peaks were preceded by the commercial power. The same data is being tracked by tournament directors from Indian Wells to Miami to Roland Garros. Regardless of her seeding, a player who packs stadiums embodies a certain kind of worth that goes beyond conventional analytics. The first test of this new reality at the top level of the sport will take place at Indian Wells. If the crowds are as intense as those in Dubai, and if the outcomes keep rising, the establishment will formally recognize what Filipino fans have known since Miami in the 2026 season. The following chapters are self-written. This week's Indian Wells, Miami's comeback in 3 weeks, and the clay courts swing through Madrid and Rome. Every incident turns becomes a new data point in an unstoppable narrative. The remaining distance was revealed in the Dubai quarterfinal matchup with Goff, 6-0, 6-2, a score that was unambiguous. In her press conference following the game, Eala explicitly addressed it. She acknowledged that there was a noticeable gap and offered no justifications. "But I'm on the right path," she continued. She was seated for the first time at a WTA 1000 event in Indian Wells 14 days later. The rout she alluded to has already resumed. Miami's wild card run, the standing room crowds in Dubai, Johnson's clear statement, and the Nike picture honoring her ancestry. The seeded that changed the course of Filipino tennis history. And how many of you have prayed for me throughout it all? In ways that the sport has seldom seen, Alex Eala has turned fan loyalty into competitive moments. The experts who previously disregarded her now have to explain how they failed to see that 115 million Filipinos clearly did. Before the rankings validated it, they were aware of excellence. Before the seedings demanded respect, they filled stadiums. They used to think that belief was safe. Is it still necessary to close the golf gap before the coronation is finished, or can Eala turn that belief into a deep Indian Wells run? Leave a comment with your prediction. You belong to the group that initially witnessed this story if you have been following it since Miami. Fans that believed early on should subscribe now, since this chapter is just getting started and they should be able to see every second of what happens next.